We, in the scientific age, have understandable difficulty with the gospel stories of demonic possessions. They are difficult to preach on because we don't experience the demons or the demonic as described in the Bible. If we can take and we can place them in a literary rather than a literal tradition, then we might see that all of the demons Jesus confronts have three things in common. They cause self-destructive behavior in the victim. The victim feels trapped in that condition, and they separate the victim from normal living in the family circle. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Though many of us, in fact, suffer the same kind of snares and burdens. Preaching professor Dr. Michael Rogness says, if we define demons as those forces which have captured us and prevent us from becoming what God intends us to be, we are surrounded by, yes, we are even possessed by, as many demons as those whom Jesus encountered. Our demons may be different kinds: mental illness, schizophrenia, paranoia, addictions, obsessions, destructive habits, and so on. And we might add the demon of fear, fear of the other, fear of the Muslim, fear of the LGBT agenda, fear of the hatred of the West by fundamentalists of another kind. And note that the similarities between this demon-possessed man and the demons that possess us, he was totally cut off from his family and society. He didn't live where people did, but he lived in the tombs, probably in caves that were used as burying places. He was also driven by the demon into the wilds. In other words, he was already in a living death, separated from normal people and normal living. Luke Powery, the chaplain at Duke Divinity Chapel, says that Jesus meets some foes in the forms of demons that wrecked this man's life. He gets down and dirty into his exorcist ministry. He enters what might have been considered a domain of death. And in this scene, as one commentator writes, nothing is kosher. Everything is unclean. The spirit, the tomb, the pigs, the territory. Jesus risks contamination for the life of this one man. A storm rages in his life. He lives in the tombs. He's a dead man walking, possessed by demons that drive him into the wilds. He's a wild thing who breaks the physical chains but cannot break the chains of his own life. His demonic problems are legion, huge and perhaps as large as the Roman army's legion of 4,000 to 6,000 soldiers. This naked, homeless, dead, foreign outsider has DPPD. He has demon-possessed personality disorder. He sees clearly who Jesus is, unlike his disciples, yet he's unable to recognize his own sickness. He thought everyone wore chains and shackles as an en vogue fashion statement. And ironically, he begs Jesus not to torment him when in fact he is already tormented. He knew no other reality but tragedy. His demonic storm was his norm, so much so that he didn't want to be free or even know what freedom is. But Jesus gets his name to control over him and casts out the unclean spirit. This man is freed from his internal chains, and he is found clothed and in his right mind, sitting at the feet of Jesus. The one who had been possessed by demons has been healed, or it can be translated saved. This man is healed of demon possession. He is saved from destruction. He's freed to rejoin the community of humanity and enter into his new vocation. People calling themselves Christian also know who Jesus is, and we too are unable to see our own sickness. We have created a culture of fear as we shift ourselves into groups of people who think the same way we do. We are polarized, we are balkanized, and all the time we beat our plowshares into weapons. Last was an office party in San Bernardino, where innocents were killed by a terrorist they knew as a co-worker with assault rifles. Then Planned Parenthood in Colorado Springs. It was a white supremacist, this time with 14 weapons, assault weapons in Roseburg, Oregon. Before that, a military center in Chattanooga, and then it was Mother Emanuel just a year ago, yesterday, with the murder of a Bible study group by another white supremacist. We can count back further, of course. We can go to an elementary school in Newtown and a movie theater in Aurora, and we can go back and back. And you know what happens? Each time we do this, each time there's one of these terrible, awful shootings, we play out as a country the same old script. The NRA tells us why this is not about our culture of guns. People then go out and buy machines, the only purpose of which is to kill the most human beings as rapidly as possible. We ask for gun laws, and they are stalled or killed by our legislators whose campaigns are funded by the NRA. And finally, we are told that this is not the time to politicize because there is a tragedy that has just occurred, and we must focus on the victims. Well, a mass shooting is defined as when 4 people are killed or wounded, so we now average more in this country than 1 mass shooting a day. Is that enough for us? 1 mass shooting a day. No other country comes remotely close, and 50% of the world's weapons are in the hands of 5% of the people, our own American citizens. And adding up new guns and imports and subtracting gun exports last year, there would have been roughly 40 million more guns than people in this country. And while households that have guns have shrunk down to 1 in 3, those people with assault rifles own multiple weapons. Our culture is hovering around the tombs like the Gerasene demoniac, in a place that is unclean, unhealthy, and unsustainable. Nothing would go further for those whose turn may be next than to speak with insistence, work with diligence, and politicize this violence. With the slaughter of LGBT people and their friends last week, Gabriel Aruna wrote in the New York Times, "The disgust that the Orlando gunman reportedly felt at seeing 2 gay men kiss in front of his son was political. It was the product of a culture where leaders have for decades compared same-sex love to bestiality, portrayed gay people as threats to children, and passed laws to stop them from adopting or even marrying. That the gunman was able to purchase a weapon of mass murder capable of shooting over 20 rounds in 9 seconds, the civilian version of a military weapon, is also the product of our own politics, which makes no distinction between guns that can be used for sport or self-defense and those designed to take as many lives as possible in the short amount of time. A tragedy with political causes has political solutions." And a friend of mine wrote a few days ago on Facebook, "I'm damn sick of repeatedly hearing the same arguments for why your right to own something designed exclusively to kill is more important than my right not to be killed." We have our own demons. How will they ever be cast out? There's a letter on the patio today that you can sign, a short and sensible call for control. And like the Gerasene, we are unable to recognize our own sickness. Henry David Thoreau, the poet and philosopher, once wrote these words. He said, "The gods we worship write their names on our faces. Be sure of that. We will worship something, and therefore it behooves us to be careful about what and whom we worship, because it signals that what we are worshiping is what we are becoming." Thoreau may have meant for these to be cautionary words. If what we worship is what we hold most precious, if what we worship is what we dedicate ourselves to most fully, if what we worship is what we practice most diligently, that will shape who we become as people and as a country. And so if we make gods out of money or fame or power, they will write their names on our faces, and we will be readily recognized as greedy or vain or domineering it will be written all over us. And so Thoreau is right. We should be careful about what and whom we worship. Last Sunday we gathered here to worship a God that loves and includes all. It was so timely to be able to provide a healing place to come to after such terrible news broke just hours before. This past week, people gathered all over this country for vigils and marches, remembering all of the awful things that happened in Orlando, but particularly in solidarity with the community that gathered last week to celebrate and to dance at the Pulse nightclub. In the faces lit by candlelight at vigils, there were no such distortions of identity that Thoreau evidenced or referenced, written on the faces of the people who just felt called to go somewhere and stand with a hurting community. And seeing the shock and the pain at the senseless deaths of people we did not have the privilege to know, a country acted with grace. Something beautiful and blessed was written on those faces at those vigils. There was compassion for survivors and for the devastated, grieving families of the victims. There was also, though, a broken-heartedness that comes of our assumptions for our own safety and our fondest dreams for freedoms laid waste by hatred and by violence. And that implies to me that what we worship as people, who we worship, is nothing trivial or weak or self-serving or small, because there is love in our midst. And in the end, love always wins. Love always wins. Love always wins. The Reverend Dr. Casey Baguette in Orlando said at a gathering several of us attended yesterday, a story was shared. He said, I want to share with you. One person said she had participated on a Monday night at a vigil in Orlando from the victims, and she found herself angry and tearful and hopeless. And turning to go, she was followed by a woman who clearly wanted to comfort her, even though comfort seemed impossible just then. But the two talked a bit about the unthinkable act in the Pulse nightclub and how someone could have been brought to do such a thing, and the comforter said this, well, honey, I think that shooter lost his love. Honey, I think that shooter just lost his love, and yes, I think so too. But here is the hope to which we may cling. We don't have to lose ours. Love is more powerful than hatred. Love is deeper than anger. Love is more penetrating and wiser than any schemes for harm. Love wins. Love always wins. And that is why our tears this week are not shed in vain. If they are tears of loss and also of love, then they are tears of hope for love's capacity to change everything. And so today, let's go from this place with love written all over our faces, and let that be what we show to the aching, worried, weary world. Let us reflect all that we hold dearest, because we know that love always wins. Love always wins. And let us be bearers of healing and hope, because you know it says, and it's true, blessed are the peacemakers, because they will be the children and called the children of God. Amen. Let's rise and sing our closing Alleluia.